Jim Hunt from West Virginia. So with your 40 years in government, please guide me. So I am trying to increase awareness for Stop Asian Hate. People don't know about it. And if they do, they're like, oh, I've heard of it, but don't really know. And so I want to increase awareness and invite people to do something. And if they really need to do something, if they want to stop. And I was wondering if you could guide me to how to make a difference through the cities, because I think that if the cities endorse, make a statement or something, then they're an authority. It used to be, I don't know what it is now, that authorities meant something, because right now there's not a lot of talk about it. So if you can share with me kind of what are some of the steps, because I made a comment at one of the council meetings the other day, but I just don't really know how does that do anything? So if you could just, yeah.
Yeah, Jolene, and I think the one thing that, and I'm a believer in the power of cities. I think, and when I say the power of cities, I think it includes not just not just City Hall, but kind of that dynamic that is a city. And it's different in every city. There's a culture and the way, different cities, have different strengths and weaknesses, and there's so not everything works in every city, but there are strategies, I think, that sometimes we look at City Hall as being the permission place. It's kind of like if I'm going to build a deck, I go to City Hall and I get permission to do it. And in many cases, people tend to feel like I need to go to City Hall for permission. And much like you were saying, and when we talked earlier about, going to a city hall and approaching the governing body and asking, more or less, what can you do? What can I do with you, or however, to address the issue of Asian hate or other, and I've worked on, over the years, it's sad, but, most of my city career has been built around incidents or things that occurred that affected my city. And if you didn't react and do something, then people tended to take an opinion of your city. That's what I'm saying, is all the different opinions sometimes, is that I think a lot of times elected leaders in cities are sometimes unsure of their power. What can they do? Can they stand up to hate? How do we had an incident in my town. We had the first African-American mayor elected. And within, I think, 3 weeks to a month, the Ku Klux Klan sent a notice that they were going to rally in our city, which they hadn't for years. It was decades since they'd done anything. And so that was an incident that occurred, and we bounded together and worked together to develop what we called the Unity Rally. And that Unity Rally took on a life of its own. It was very inclusive. We had a thing where we said, we're doing the Unity Rally, not in competition with the Ku Klux Klan rally, but we wanted to give good people an option to do something to counter the hate that was out in the community. And we used a logo or a slogan that was saying, we're having the Unity Rally. It was in October, and we said, bring blankets, not sheets. And of course, and it was a thing that kind of caught hold, and then it created this movement in our community and throughout the state. There was a lot of attention given to it. But the point of that is that that if, let's say, if it's a group, if it's a person or a group that is not a part of the city, and you're coming to the city to look at it, I guess, as an ally, right? You're wanting to say that there is hate prevalent or in our community. We are suffering these incidents of hate, and we believe that this city is a place where hate should not exist, that we're better than that. And in most cases, the challenge, though, and where you get a little pushback from elected officials, from governing bodies, is that they take a defensive posture as if you're attacking them as the cause of the hate. So, and it is, and believe you me, over the years, and I've worked all over the country. I've worked down in Selma, Alabama, just, Rock Hill, South Carolina, and a lot of places that have had a history of racial tension and racial divide and division. And it's unbelievable to me when I go, like when I went down to Selma, I have a different view of Selma. I view Selma as kind of this shrine to civil rights. I look at it that it's not the Selma of, it's not the Selma of today in a way. It's in my mind based upon the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the civil rights movement, Dr. King and John Lewis and all of that. But when I went to Selma, there was the council was a diverse or relative, a gender diverse, racial diverse. And I noticed that there were people, primarily the Caucasian members of the Selma Council, were taking, they were looking at it like this is an attack on them, and they were pushing back some. And kind of seeing this 6'4" white guy from West Virginia coming into town, they viewed it, I think, as like, oh, we've found our ally. We can talk openly to Jim, even though they didn't know me. And I was very good friends with the first African-American mayor of Selma, James Perkins. So it was, and so I say that as kind of the self-awareness of people approaching the city, that you need to go in. And in many cases, I think it's probably a good idea, rather than getting on stage, in other words, rather than doing the council meeting first, it might be something to where you request a meeting with either a council person or the mayor or the city manager, and lay out for them, because in many cases you're going to find that they're 100% on your side. I mean, they want to stop the hate as much as anyone. But when it comes and it is the public meetings, like the dynamics of a public meeting creates what we've seen now. Like I tell people, if you Google on YouTube, city council meeting, you do not have the four top items that come up are not like how to conduct a peaceful city council meeting, or this is an example of the best city council meeting ever. You get the screaming, shouting, and that. So people tend to take their cues from what they see, and the anti-maskers and all of these things, tend to follow a certain, it's almost as if they're reading out of the same playbook. Because they use the same words, the same talking points and all that. And so when I say that, it's kind of like if you go in with the idea that, I have an objective here, and that is I have a passion, I have a cause, and whether that cause might be ending diabetes or whatever, but, in this case, let's say Stop Asian Hate. You want to get a sense of what that councils, where they come at this, how have they handled issues in the past? What is it that you can do? Is the council such that they might be willing to do a proclamation? They might be able to do a public affirmation of the community's willingness to develop alternatives, kind of the alternative to hate. And how can we address issues that might be in the community, but, can we create a forum, whatever? And when you do that, you start to get a sense of their tolerance for what they're willing to do. And I haven't figured out yet when someone, I think everybody ought to be on the same page we're on. I just think that, when you go out, that there would never be an opposition to somebody in the community wanting to make it a better community. However, that doesn't take in the realities of life that, in my lifetime, I've come to realize that, you're going in at some times where people bring either a lack of knowledge or faulty knowledge to an argument, to an issue. And when people come across as, I'm going to educate you on the Asian hate issue in our community, a lot of people don't, I mean, they take personal offense. It's like, well, that doesn't exist here, or I don't, this is not the right forum, or this, you want to do it, go do it at a church. I don't really care, or, that. But I think generally, and in my experience, and I've visited thousands of cities over the years, and then probably, and most of my friends have got some connection to a city. And some of the greatest people that I know, I mean, some of the strongest people, some of the people that have fought battles that you and I will never experience, have gone through the city system. They're in the system. They're either mayors, council members, staff people, and things like that. And they get it. And I think that's the majority. I really do. I don't think it's just like, 50-50, you'll just likely encounter somebody that's supportive once in a blue moon. It's really, most people share that. They don't want their city associated with hate. They don't want to be known as a haven for, intolerance and that. So I think one of the ideas is meeting one-on-one and letting them meet you and your group or whatever, and know that you're not there to create a scene. You're there with a purpose to address your issue. And that generally is the first step. Then what happens is, if you meet, let's say, with the city manager, and I use this little story that I tell people, I served on city council and as mayor for 27 years in my town, the longest any individual has ever served on that. And when I did that, so you started to see trends and themes that things would happen. And people will sometimes ask me, explain to me why this happens, or why I couldn't get my point across with the city. And one of the reasons is that almost every time it ever happened that someone new showed up in council chambers. So if you came to our city council when I was serving as mayor or city council, you would be sitting in, let's say you just walked in and you said, you know what, I just wanted to experience a local government meeting. Within 10 seconds, I'd be sitting up there before the meeting, and one of my colleagues would lean over and say, do you know the lady in the back row? And I'd look back, and I'd say, no, I don't know who that is. What do you suppose she wants? And then the city manager, if no one knew, if they said, oh, well, that's Jolene, she's, a person, I know her, she's a good person, all that. If you didn't get that answer, you'd lean over to the city manager and you'd say, do you have any idea why that lady's back there? Now, that's a little paranoid, and I know I can tell from your expression, but that is the reality in almost every city, because I've been the guy in the back of the room on hundreds of occasions. And it is disarming when you're sitting in there and that, like, I go a lot of times to represent companies or different, clients that I have. And it is because it's the most uncomfortable thing. And take this as a fact, just from somebody who sat there. It's the most uncomfortable thing to start a meeting and not know that you're not going to get blindsided. And in a lot of cases where someone would be in the audience and they'd be sitting back there, they're very quiet and they're just looking and all. And then all of a sudden it'd say, okay. And we always did the public comment section of the meeting. And you'd either sign up and all, and then, everybody's looking at that. Jolene, what's, does anybody know her? So when you would stand up, in that 2-second time frame, that you start your presentation, you have everyone on that dais nervous as a cat. I mean, they're just sitting there like, oh my God, what did we do now? And it's a little bit paranoid as a local government official, because people do not come to council meetings to congratulate you. They don't. So
I witnessed that.
Yeah. So someone's upset about something, somebody's got a cause, somebody's got this and that. And most of the cases, I mean, there are times where you're put in very uncomfortable situations. And so that's kind of setting the stage. That means that if the city manager says, oh, that's a nice young lady, I met with her last week, she's working on Stop Asian Hate. I talked to her, I think let's listen and what she has to say. It changes the dynamics of the meeting. And believe you me, so many people don't get that because you have to almost live it. And even, I don't know that I knew it after 2 terms, like 8 years on council. I don't know that I knew that. I mean, I was still being the paranoid person. But after you're there, and I was there so long, and that's unusual. There's not that many people that serve as many years as I did because of term limits and a lot of other reasons. But that is one of the things that some people will never learn that. They'll be paranoid about it the entire time they serve. So, and this happens, I can tell you, this happens. I sat at a Los Angeles City Council meeting several years ago, and they have, I could almost point in the crowd, I'd say, well, there's Mr. Jones that's in our city. There's Sam, so, you could identify the type of characters, if you will, that come to local meetings. So that kind of pre-meeting or the introduction or letting people know. The other thing is that there is a level of respect and that a lot of times is not shown. I mean, a lot of times people come with I
saw that. I witnessed that big time.
Yeah. And so, you want to be, I mean, I think it's one of those things where whether, I think most people are accustomed to, there was this sense that being in local government or any form of government used to kind of almost demand respect. It doesn't anymore. And people tend to look at that kind of that attitude of, you work for me and by God, my taxes pay your salary and, you'll do what I tell you to do and all. And I think that's unfortunate, but that is the life we live. And I don't want to live in a dictatorship to where that's not permitted. I mean, if someone comes to council and they're upset, they have an issue that's coming, there's many times that are serious issues where the city may have failed. I don't want to take that away from that person who has that passion that they're going to do. But generally, so you're looking at it from a standpoint, how does my cause get moved forward and how will the city be an ally rather than an opponent in some ways? And that is that, showing respect and the, addressing the mayor as, Mr. Mayor and so forth. And generally there will be in every council, usually that I've experienced, I mean, there's councils with 40 people on them, but generally you're looking at, 7 to 10 council members and a mayor. That's kind of, there. But Nashville, Tennessee has 40 some members of council. Charleston, West Virginia has 27 members of council. So a lot of, it's not that way everywhere. Los Angeles just has, I think, 12 council members, 12 or 14. So it's not based on size. But it's just the way they were organized going in. And on every council, there is a skeptic. There just is. And they're looking at how could the city be harmed by what Jolene's presenting? How could the city be put in an awkward place? And I think just as we're talking to this, and I like to talk openly, I mean, there's no sense beating around the bush, is that the Black Lives Matter movement created, I think based upon a very, the right reason. I mean, that there was a horrific crime and there's been this police violence against African Americans in many ways, primarily in the country. But when, so a council that looks at it and says, we have the director of the Cleveland Black Lives Matter movement addressing council, it puts people in these political squeezes where they tend, and I still can't figure it out why it's such a hard concept to get of why when Asians are being victimized, on a daily basis, that all lives do matter. I mean, there's no question about it, every life, but it doesn't address the issue of the day. It doesn't address the reality of the day. And so it's like when that happens, the skeptic on councils generally look at that as if, well, geez, my constituents are going to jump all over me because I am separating. Now we're focused on Stop Asian Hate, or Black Lives Matter, or all of the different variants of I talked this morning. I was on a Zoom call with a young man in Washington, D.C. on this anti-Semitic violence that's occurring now. I was in central Times Square and different places around the country. So it's one of those things where I tend to believe, I look at it, that obviously any hate there is the fact that if we stopped Asian hate and it's transferred over to some other group, there's not a win in that. It's like, I think we're all looking at the same goal, which is reducing hate in society in general. But the one part of it is, and I would be the first to say, your voice has been one that I think, hits the right tone, is that it's not like everything else doesn't matter, but let me say something that's close to my heart and let me explain a culture and maybe some aspects of it that you might not otherwise get, that it might pass by. And there is some unique dynamics, I believe, what I've observed and read about the Asian hate of the last, I think it's like systemic, much like, a lot of the problems in society, but it does rise up because of other incidents. So this is a time, it doesn't mean that 6 months or 2 years ago that there wasn't an undercurrent that people didn't experience Asian hate. It's the fact that, like, through circumstances, it creates opportunities where people who are destined to hate, I think they hate when they get up in the morning, they tend, they take it out in that way. So, but back to the cities, and I would look at it from a standpoint that take the city kind of where they are and hopefully move them to where you think that you'd like them to be, and help them along on that path, because they will be on the day that you're there, just understanding the following meeting, there will be another person with another passionate cause and another issue. So it's kind of hard to say. Sometimes it could, that you want to have that conversations, you want to say, I'm willing to work with you. It's probably not going to change the city's strategic plan and become their number one effort. But I think, and the other thing, and that's a good point, I think, is that check out the city go to their websites, look at their strategic plans, look at what they've done, look at how they've handled diversity issues and different things over the years. And there's a wealth of opportunity there, and it's probably, a lot of it's probably good. I mean, there are cities that are very progressive in the way that they handle, all sorts of diversity and issues. There are others, quite frankly, that aren't that, progressive. But if you look and see that they have sponsored, certain items, certain causes in the past, then it gives you an indication that I think I've got some, we have some common ground here, and maybe we may want to look at that as a way of going forward. The other thing, if you run into a block wall, which happens on occasion, let's say you just go and you think, this is just, I'm disappointed that the city was not more accepting of my ideas or thoughts of just bringing awareness to this. At that point, then you're looking at, what can I do that I'd like to do? What part of my cause do I want, as far as letting people know, giving awareness, having that? What is it that I can do within the framework of being a citizen, of being in that community? Is there an opportunity? Can we use, and I've done this over the years, and of course I was in government, but I understand them. The City Hall is a public building. It's a very noticeable building. If something happens at City Hall, it has, and I say this is my opinion, if an event is staged on the plaza at City Hall, it has a lot more awareness than if it happened at the Fourth Baptist Church down on Fifth Street. That's not against the church. It's just that people looks at City Hall as having this authoritative, this is the city speaking and doing. So if let's say the city was agreeable, you can have the mayor, let's say they do a public proclamation, you do a podcast with the mayor, you look at opportunities where the city has been very progressive and highlight those things where have a conversation with the police chief on is the Asian hate on their radar screen and what are they doing? And you'll find, I think in most cases, there's an answer there. It might be kind of revealing, but it's also helpful. Just think if you had the police chief of a community on this program like you're doing, and you ask, in a very open way, is like, our subject today is Stop Asian Hate. What is your police department? Is that on the radar screen? As if you're saying, not that it has to be today, but I'm just asking, is it on your radar screen? What you get then is an answer that the person might say, you know what? It really hasn't been, but in talking with you and understanding that this is something that I've probably let slip, I'm going to put it there. I mean, what a revelation there. And that's even in the case where the city was not being very proactive. But if they are proactive and you just don't know about it, it's very helpful and I think very informative to people where you say, my goodness, the city is doing a lot of stuff. Their minority hiring practices has been one that is looking at opening doors and roads for a more inclusive police force and things like that. So those are kind of things where if you view it as an open door, it's a very open door. If you view it as a closed door, it feels like you'll never get beyond it and get any results. And like I said, in my experience, there's very few closed doors. There's some that are kind of cracked open, others, but the bulk of them are still a reflection of the people. They're a reflection of society. I think society, I think we all have to believe this, is that hate is not the predominant driving force in our society. It has to be that we look at inclusivity, at peacefulness, at living in peace, and and working within other religions and races and all of this. So it's an environment, I think, that most cities want to be better than they are. They want your judgment in a way of saying, I'm so happy I came tonight because you've really opened my eyes. This is, positive. And I think it's there, to do.
Okay, I want to believe you. I have several follow-up questions. And what I hear from you is that I have access to all of these local people. Like I can talk to the police chief, or I can try to. Like people do have contacts with authority, like local authorities.
Right.
Okay. Because that's just, I work techie. I have no idea. And then what if I reach out to the city manager or the mayor or council person, what does this email look like? Like about Stop Asian Hate, what does that look like?
Yeah, and I've gotten over my tenure, obviously, I've gotten hundreds of inquiries, whether it be by phone, whether it be, sometimes the mayor has a scheduler. I know, and in your area, actually the mayor of Tacoma now is the second vice president of the National League of Cities. And I've been in her office. She's a very lovely lady. Her father was the first African-American council member in Tacoma years ago. And she's taken that and now she's the mayor. And like I said, unbelievable, Conrad Lee over in Bellevue. But sometimes it's like figuring out, and whether it's a phone call to the city, like in most cases, the city clerk in smaller towns will be kind of the scheduler. They're the heartbeat of the city. So when you talk to the city clerk, they're the ones that knows the mayor's schedule, knows the, can get you in and so forth. And it comes down to it. It's kind of a simple explanation, and they get these all the time. And that's the other thing, it's like if you don't know what the previous 10 callers called City Hall for, you feel like, oh my God, I don't know what to say. But you realize that everyone wants something from the city. They want something. They're wanting services. They're wanting their trash picked up. They're wanting to go to a council meeting or whatever. Or wondering, when is the council meeting? When's the elections? How do I file for election and all of that? So those calls come in the City Hall all the time. So don't be afraid to just call in. Hi, my name's Jolene. What I'm looking at is I'm working on a project here about Stop Asian Hate. Wanted to talk to the mayor possibly, or one of the council members, and just get a feel for what the city of so-and-so is doing. In most cases, that'll be met with, it's like, well, the mayor's schedule is very busy. Now we have, Councilman Hunt might be willing to talk to you. I would take that opportunity. I'd take the, whatever's offered up at that point. And you can also do the same thing. I do it every day. I go onto a city's website. I find the council's emails, the mayor's email, and I'll send an email. And I do that very relatively short email. Hi, this is Jim Hunt. I'm going to be in, so-and-so. I wanted to talk to the mayor about one of my clients or something that I'm doing. Sometimes it's difficult getting through the gatekeepers and all of that, but you'll get, if you send to each council member and the mayor, and just a request that I'd like to sit down at some point in the future and spend maybe 30 minutes talking about an issue in our community that I think is very serious. Stop Asian Hate. I'm also doing some multimedia online stuff, and would love to talk to you about possibly sharing the city's thoughts about this. That, like I said, it's one of those things. You'll find a door open somewhere, and someone will say, "Come on in and let's talk." And then you follow that through, and then, like I said, have that the first introductory kind of meeting that really is just a feeling out meeting of saying, "Here's what I'm doing. I think this city, has so much potential, and I love what you've done and know a little bit about it. I love what you did last year when this happened. So could we, do you think it would be appropriate for me to come to city council and just give a short presentation to introduce myself?" Most council members realize you can do that on your own and be upset, as opposed to coming as a friend. So most of them will say, "Absolutely, come to the council meeting and I'd be happy to introduce you," or something like that. Or you'd ask them, "Would you mind introducing me since we've spoke?" That will bring you kind of a sense that, an authoritative sense, that you'll get a sense of, this is a friendly voice looking to make our community better. And, you kind of follow that path, but it's not, every day someone is calling, writing City Hall. They call the clerk, they call the mayor's scheduler, they call so and forth. And every elected official has a schedule. They do something every day. So between 2 and 3, Councilman Lee has a 30-minute segment he can meet with you on Tuesday. Would that work? And more than likely, they will. It's just the nature of the beast. And a lot of times where we think, and I find it fascinating, a lot of times where people will tell me, they'll say, "Oh, Jim, I'm so somewhat intimidated, but I've tried to call the mayor, and I've been 6 months trying to get through, and I can't get," and I'll take my cell phone and I'll say, "Well, I got his number here. Let me call him." And people are like, intimidated from my stand. They're thinking, "Jim, why do you have that?" And I think, because I looked it up on the internet. It's not like magic. And the idea of it is really just forming that relationship, stopping by City Hall, talking to the city clerk, explaining yourself. And I can tell you, if you're, the person that calls up and says, "Hey, we're organizing a protest against the city of blank, and we're going to be there with 300 people. We're going to, this and that. We're very upset. We're going to be, whatever." those are the type of instances where all of a sudden the flags go up and people are like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? We got to prepare for this. But folks coming in, asking questions and just looking at making, like I said, making the city a better place to live, being more diverse, more welcoming. There's not that much pushback. And if you run into one closed door, look for another one, because there's someone there that'll work with you.
And could I reach out to all, let's say in Lake Forest Park, could I reach out to all the council members?
Yeah.
If I wanted to.
And actually, that's actually a good point, is that sometimes if you don't reach out to all of them, one person, there's somebody on council feels like you excluded them. So you want to be able to say, like there, if you were saying, hi, I'm introducing myself to the community. I wanted to let you know who I am and what I'm working on. And here's a little information, and this is our cause and that. And you send it to every council member and the mayor and the city manager for that matter. The more the merrier. I mean, there's no problem. It's not like there's some secretive thing or something you shouldn't be saying or that. And that way it gives them all an equal thing, because at the meeting, they're probably, in most cases, there's somebody that'll say, well, I didn't get that email. And you're saying, well, yeah, I sent it to every council member off the website or whatever. And then one of them will say, I got it. And then they realize one guy just didn't read his email. But that's, I mean, I would be more inclusive of that. And the other thing that happens is, and you're probably a lot like me too. You look at any group of people and you're kind of thinking, I could get along with this person, but this person just from appearances. And believe you me, you'll be so shocked that the person who you think is your greatest ally on a city council and the person you think is your biggest enemy are probably opposite. It just works out that way. So I wouldn't prejudge anybody in local government. Sometimes you'll find that there are people, and I'm a good example of it. Like I said, almost everywhere I go, I'm never identified as the guy pushing an inclusive agenda. And I,
that guy, he's one of us.
Yeah.
Big, tall, white dude with the accent.
And kind of a common thing. And I had an interesting conversation the other day, and this was, and just a side note, this young lady, it's a physical therapist, been helping me last few weeks with my knee therapy. She came in, she was telling me a story, and she said, I was taught school in the South. And so we were just discussing, and she said, when I first went there, coming from West Virginia, I really had never experienced like a multicultural school or workplace. And she said, and that's the truth. I mean, West Virginia is one of the lowest diverse states in the country. So you could grow up and never sit at a table with a person of a different race. And you'd only known one example of a person. So you've given your whole cultural identity for one person you met in high school or something. And that's how we make that's what some of the problems are. But she was telling me, she said she went and she was an athletic trainer in this school system. And she said she went into the cafeteria and she said, what was strange is that all of the African-American teachers were sitting at their own table at the lunchroom. And she said, when I sat down, which presumably she sat down at the all white table, she said, when she noted that to him, just as an observation, she said, one of the people said, well, they prefer it that way. And all of a sudden, so we spent probably 10 minutes talking about it, but there's been studies done on this. This is something, and it's like, no one ever said, it's like, well, geez, there's more white people sitting at white tables. Maybe it's because you haven't reached out. Maybe it's because people feel that they're the odd person out. Maybe this is a thing where it's very awkward and no one's opened the doors and all. And I said, it's so funny that our prejudices tend toward always biasing us toward being right. And that if we're looking at something, we don't say, oh my gosh, should I and I've done this. And so I know why, because like I said, when I go, I always think like, oh my gosh, I just hate people having a prejudging of me coming from West Virginia and, all of the things. So, with the National League of Cities, when I win, it's the most diverse place in America. It just is. I've learned so much and gained so much from the people that I've met at the National League of Cities, because you have elected officials of every race, creed, color, everything in this organization that are all peers of yours in elected office, which is very unusual. It doesn't happen in too many other instances. And what I did when I started going to these meetings and recognizing that I did not have the background in inclusivity and diversity and all. So I just started, when I'd go to a luncheon, I looked for the table that looked so different than me and sat down. And on occasion, people would, look at me and they're kind of like, does this guy not know that, why don't you go over there? You'll be more comfortable and this and that. And I'm there introducing myself, coming from West Virginia. And they're either thinking I'm the dumbest person on the earth or something's a little, and I can tell you, and of course it takes time, but, over the years, my closest friends at the National League of Cities were people will come up to me and they said, you're the first person I met. And no one else reached out to me. And I can remember, and in most cases, it's a person of a different race, a different, whatever. And so those are the type of things, like I said, sometimes the responsibility falls on us, that we're looking at it saying like they're understanding. And when I'd give speeches, I'd tell people, I said, listen, I come from West Virginia. I grew up in a very non-diverse state. If I say something wrong, I want you to come up and correct me. I want you to do it quietly and respectfully. I don't want to be embarrassed, but I want you to know that I have more capability of saying something wrong just because of my upbringing. And it's not out of hatred. It's not out of, any animus. It's just the fact that when you grow up, and I've talked to dozens of people over the years that have come up to me and said, Jim, you seem like you're able to do it. I want to be like you. And I've had these cowboys from Texas. And this guy was bigger than me, probably 6'8", had a cowboy hat on, big belt. And he walked up to me in Frisco, Texas. I'll never forget it. And he came up to me and he said, could I talk to you for a minute? And I said, yeah. And I was down there at a racial equity meeting. He came and he said, so we went over on one of the sofas at the Hilton Hotel there and just sat, me and him. He's this great big guy. And he said, I want to be like you. And I said, like what? He said, I'm so afraid of saying the wrong thing. He said, I feel exactly like you did, like you were describing in your speech. But he said, I can't, in my town, I'm so afraid that if I say the wrong thing, that people will take it wrong and I'll have hurt them and I'll never be able to go there again. And I said, you're exactly where I am. You just got to plod through it. The first trip to, in my town, the first trip to our African-American church, I felt the most awkward I'd ever felt in my life. Didn't know very many people. I was invited there to a service. Didn't know if anyone knew even who I was. I was an elected council member at that time. And I sat in the church and just felt like, oh, these people were all looking at me like, this guy only shows up. He would never come here if it wasn't for this event. And so that night went down and ate dinner, or they had a social hour, and we ate and met a few people and all. And I used to tell people that night I went home, I felt very awkward. I felt like that, it doesn't feel comfortable for me. And and I was thinking there was probably a thought, I may not go back. And then the second time I went, I felt that I recognized somebody. Hey, there's Bob, I met him and this and that. And then after that, and then, toward the end, I knew more people there. I'd walk in and I knew the majority of the congregation. And that doesn't happen in one visit. That doesn't happen in one council meeting or things like that. But like I say, I think the bulk of people that are in local government are not as divided as the rest of the world at this time. I think people are looking at, we've got to find avenues to fix this. And if we can, you'll have some allies there. You'll also have some people that are probably pushing another agenda, but you're going to have that in any group. At least this one, when the mayor, and it's like not every proclamation that a mayor has signed reflects their true feelings. Sometimes it's political pressure, sometimes it's the moment. But the reality of it is the signature's the same, the proclamation's the same, the impact's the same. And sometimes that education process, you'll find, and I've seen it happen so many times where, after a while, people, they read enough, they see enough, they hear enough presentations. Like when you go, you may not break the code, but you have to realize no one breaks the code the first time. If you're trying to get into a safe, you try the easy numbers, you try the things that you think. And it might be the 10th meeting, but if you didn't go the first time, there'll never be a 10th meeting. And that's where I think the strength of this is that, in all of these efforts around the country, around the world, someone's got to go and they got to feel defeated and they got to walk out thinking there's no hope here. And then they go back again and they go back again. And those folks are looking and they're saying, you know what? I kind of like her. I kind of like the message. I didn't know this before when she explained something. And all of a sudden then, third or fourth time, and you've worked at a community outing, you're there helping on something, this and that, it opens some doors that you won't believe, I think, the impact of it.
Well, that is inspiring. And I appreciate the message of persistence. I am persistent, but I also like instant gratification. I'm used to attention. So you can imagine this is hard for me, Jim.
Yeah, no, and it is. And I've been that way too. It's like, I look at it like there, why don't you get this? I mean, I'm telling people like, you're not seeing this. And then you have to realize that my experiences in my life have formed, kind of, and it's not all been easy. It's not all been simple. So I've gone through, a ton of things where, that after many, many years and kind of working and stuff and seeing success. And that's where I think, like I said, and the other thing is, you need to be around. Like if you find an ally, and let me point out some resources too in the local government thing. Like there in the state of Washington, you have the Washington Association of Cities. And it's in Olympia. They have I've been to their offices. They have
what? Wait a second. I think I spoke for them like 20 years ago.
Yeah. And that group, they are the organization that represents every city in the state of Washington. So they're and it's probably worth touching base because that opens the door to all of the cities and gives them an idea of maybe a track at their conference this fall or summer where they'd say, let's do a panel. And Jolene, we'd like you to be on it. Or could you suggest people? Could you look at, we've had cities reach out to us that are having challenges. Could you help with that? They're an excellent resource. And I mean, their websites available and all. And then the National League of Cities also, I mean, there's resources at the National League of Cities. That's a big priority of the National League of Cities, is building inclusive communities and working to end racism and all. But you'll find that as a kind of an ally, reaching out to them as just the average citizen, a person out here saying, hey, I'm over here where I'm at. I can be of assistance. I'd love to work with you if there's something I can do as a resource. But if I would need you, what do you offer? And you'll be surprised that they'll say, well, we have this initiative going on. We have this school program going on and stuff. So don't overlook some of these local resources and organizations that represent cities. Because there's so much value there. And then when you kind of get that stamp of approval, let's say through the Washington Association of Cities, then you're able to kind of go into a city hall and say, hey, I've been working with the Association of Washington Cities, and here's our thing, and we're working on this and all. And you become more like you're one of us, you're working on something that will help our city.
That is helpful, because the thing is, I'm trying to help with education and all these different things, but I love the idea of getting into the national or the state and have them do what they do and all at one time, because I'm all volunteer. And so I love that idea. So right now I'm thinking of starting with the city of Kenmore, which seems so inclusive already. And then having a few individual conversations there, maybe with the mayor, maybe the city manager, and then maybe going to the Washington cities, because if I can kind of get a feel for that and get some ideas, then I might go there and talk to you of who I might talk to there, and then see what can happen. I'm not so comfortable with where I live. I'm not sure. I went to a city thing, and I'm not sure. So I am speaking today for King County judge and something rather, but they were so I'm just going to make an announcement. I was going to have 5 minutes to talk before they do this other thing, but the judge was like, is that Stop Asian Hate, that's political. I'm like, what's political about it? So I'm going to make an announcement, and then next week I'm going to do an open to everybody, but marketed through Shoreline and the nearby cities, about what is how do we create safety in our neighborhood, and what about Stop Asian Hate? How is there a way to market that through any city entities, or what are avenues to publicize that are accessible that you know of?
Yeah, and let me say, and I did this a little, and I've worked, a good bit in Washington in the last couple of years, and so I've been to Shoreline and all through I think we visited 40 cities in a couple of weeks when we were up there. And I've got a lot of good friends. Like I said, Conrad Lee over in Bellevue, and Victoria Woodard's over in Tacoma. So there's a core group in Shoreline. There's a couple of folks that I know that are on different committees at the National League of Cities. When you kind of put things in that perspective in the local side of it, don't, like I said, the one thing is, don't be intimidated by it. I mean, it clearly, there is the doors are there. I mean, it clearly, they're there. And the intimidation factor sometimes is simply just, sorting out. I mean, and that's the job of different people in city halls, is kind of sorting out to say, listen, we can't talk to everyone. We can't take on everything. We can't do this. So make sure that it meets these criteria or whatever. The squeaky wheel gets the grease and all. But like I said, persistence, and you're right, you're persistent. And the persistence is what will show the value, I think, in the long-term success of your issue, because so many times, and this, once the wave gets off of the national news on Asian hate, it will be a difficult job to bring that to cities and say, this is important. And that's where the persistence goes, because it's not going to become less important. It's just going to be less visible on the national basis and that. But that's, I mean, honest to goodness, the sad part of this is that is the challenge. That we never get, when there's an incident, when there's something that happens, when this happens, with the way the news works and the way all the social media and everything. So the point, and back to my point there, all of these cities now have Facebook pages. And if you look at the Facebook pages, you can post on the bulk of them just yourself. I mean, you can post from your Facebook account onto a city's Facebook account. and just say, I'm Jolene Jang, we're having an event, da, 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 da. If they don't permit that to be done, they have some vehicle for you to get it on there. So you either send it to someone and say, this is an event going to happen in the community. I'd like you to put this on. And there's certain standards. You can't say this or that, or it might be not for profit. I mean, all of the different things. But they'll tell you. But when I looked at the Facebook pages actually in Washington State. And it's surprising that in some communities of 20,000 people, they have like 12,000 Facebook followers on their Facebook page. So and they have very little content, because someone, obviously, as you know, they have to be producing content. And after you've done that for a couple of years, it's like, I need content. So they're looking for stuff from people in the community, but they're also more amenable to say, you'll look on there, it'll say the Christmas dinner was held, and then this is June. So but you still have followers. And and I've done this to where when you post on those Facebook pages, you'll be shocked at how many, and you just like the page and it'll show up on yours. You'll have you can affect thousands of people with your message, and you may be the only post they get from the city of Shoreline. So, that's another vehicle to get it out there.
That is so motivating. I feel like you're speaking about marketing and like business, because I've not had my business hat. This is so unbusinesslike. Like I'm such a more of like, people are dying. I just watched another murder and another stabbing, and just this last week, a couple things. I'm like, and so, but you're helping me bring it back to thinking of council people as reporters. They need news. I mean, and thinking about presenting in an invitational kind of way. And so this is quite motivating. I'm excited. And because there's Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Briar, all these tiny little cities. Yeah. I did Conrad Lee. I was at an event with him, and he was chatting with me something or other, but I didn't really take him up to meet with him. But that might be a good opportunity too. Okay, I have some action items, Jim.
Good. I'm glad I could fill your to-do list.
Well, and the thing is, like with the council people, I was like, talking to somebody else who knows a little bit, and I'm like, well, who's kind of on board? Like, so, all the council people are white here, and are all white here. And, who is there anybody who supports marginalized people, who is known for that? Because it's like, because I don't know what I'm doing, I'd want to look for the people who seem like they might be more inclusive, but I appreciate that we don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a lot of talk now in the media and on different social medias and all about the allies. How do you develop allies, and what process does that take? And that there's no question, it is a process. It's not, if it was easy, it would have already been done, because we're doing the exact same, we're just repeating history every 10 years and creating more and more problems and issues and all. But so when you look at it from the allies standpoint, to me, that's a little like a green sprig of grass growing up, is that back, and I'm getting older and older. So when I was a college senior in 1972, the issues, the Detroit, Los Angeles race riots, the assassination of Dr. King, assassination of John F. Kennedy, of Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X. All of that happened during my formative years. And honestly, you just thought like, well, geez, we know all the problems. We know really what the answers are, and which are the same answers that are out there. This will be over by the time I'm 30, and the rest of my life will be spent engaging in this new inclusive world. And it just obviously didn't happen. And so, my disappointment with it is that we didn't create more allies to the cause, is that you're growing activists based on incidents. So in other words, and I've been impressed. It's to me, the George Floyd family have really impressed me is that, there's no reason that they would be on national television every week. And in many cases, as you and I know, when you're in that glare of the spotlights, the likelihood of saying something wrong, doing something wrong, being on the wrong side of an issue and all is pretty possible. But I've been impressed that, you pick people out of a crowd in a way. You just say this person here and this person, and they become an effective spokesperson. And you're thinking, it's like, can't there be a person like you creating allies out there? And part of it is that the reason I think allies are standoffish is because they feel like Jolene won't accept me as an ally. She won't accept me as someone who just sits at, or is just out here in the world wanting to help, not knowing how. And I think that's an obligation, to say, if you want your movement, if you want the message to go out, is to figure out, and even to do a program maybe sometime on that, is that, how does the person who does not find a connection directly, that there's no connection, but they have a connection to peace and inclusivity, and that they just need the steps that, that's, if it was, like I said, if it was easy, I would have told you, I went to this seminar and they told me how to do all this. And then all of a sudden I became enlightened and that the world's been just a peaceful ride for me. But the reality of it is there's more people out there sitting thinking like, oh, the last thing I'd comment on is Asian hate, because I'm sure someone's going, there'll be something that I'm not thinking of. And I think, breaking down barriers, putting that out to where people will end up having more of a connection and feel like, Jolene's with me here. I mean, and she's not setting me up to fail. She's setting me up to succeed. And I think when you can get that across, it'll make a difference.
Yeah, it's tough. I think it's just like for many of us Asians, like any kind of acknowledgement at all, or reaching out and saying hi is like a big deal. Like, I think many of us are so tolerant of, because so very few people reach out to us. And I met with silence. The only people who are commenting now, there's about 10, there might be 14 now, but they're friends or people who on this journey, they're not my normal friends, like not the stand, like,
yeah.
And so there's still, it's really hard for the Asian Allies group. And I have that meeting tonight. It is exciting. And, I'm like, make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. That's how we learn, and just like ask questions or just do something. It's so insulting when people do nothing. That's more of an insult.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm really excited about the people that I'm meeting. And then there are some different, like the podcast the interview you saw with the Black woman who's a TV producer, and the white woman, Carrie, who is a comedian and Hollywood person. They have that show about race and are talking about it. And I found 2 other shows also, combos Black, white. And so I will insert myself in like, okay, let's talk about this, because we have to talk about race and nobody wants to, including me. But at least I'm finding a few sources, because even if people won't talk about it, they can listen to other people talking about it. So it's Jim, I tell you, it's fascinating. I mean, before it was just frustrating and maddening, and it still is, like dealing with like the murders, every week, the just different violence. It's hard, but knowing that there's one person who like, you know what, let me see what I can do. Like I'll read that article. And so that is exciting. And then now I'm able to start think of what kind of change, like in the community, like with your help, I will reach out to cities. And then, so something's happening, but I still have chocolate. So.
Well, and one thing I think from the optimistic side of it is that, and in the elected arena across the country, you know, there's a representative group of Asian and Pacific Islanders within leadership positions on city councils and mayors and all, but not that many. And like Gene Kwan was the mayor of Oakland, California, and was a good friend of mine. PC Wu is a longtime council member in Pensacola, Florida. Conrad Lee. But as I say, you know, you look at it and you're thinking, you know, in some ways it's like, oh, geez, you know, your voice within like the National League of Cities or the Association of Washington Cities would be, you know, one that people would say, well, why is she here? Or where does she fit in? And I will tell you, I think importantly, you need to be there, and you need to develop, and, you know, kind of, because people that are in elected office, you know, of whatever race, they're occupied by their office. There's no one out, you know, and the other part of it is, and I've found this over the years, is that, you know, the struggle to get into elected office in a community and all is a tough struggle. And then to be the appointed Asian defender in that community, you know, on every issue, that every time there's an incident and they call up PC Wu in Pensacola, PC, I need your, as if you haven't grown, like in a lot of cases, the business thing, grown a bench, where you have a bench of people that says, because to me, if all that you do in your life, if you don't develop people that will pick it up when you fall down, you haven't done much. You know, people can say, they'll say, oh, we're going to build a statue to Jolene because she was one of the most effective, you know, this and that. And if somebody said, well, what did she leave behind as a legacy for others to follow? How many people did she take under her wing and train and talk and this and that? If it was zero, then you look at it, it's like, I don't know that, I mean, you know, it's still, your work is your work, but it still comes down to say, you've got to develop some of these folks on the way up, because in my mind, in my life, you know, as I've gotten older, I find that I don't, you know, I try and relate as much as possible. You know, I told you I'm on TikTok now and all, but it still comes down to it. It is difficult, you know, to connect in that way. And it's hard to tell a 22-year-old up and coming person that's suffering the slings of racism and hatred and all. It's tough to tell them, like, from my standpoint, hey, it was the same when I was 22 and it hadn't gotten better. I mean, that's a depressing line from an old guy, but you got to give them the tools and feel like, you know, I can help where I can help. And if there's 20 of us working, that's 20 Jolenes with your experience and your mentorship and all of that, that's valuable. So I think that's, you know, that's probably, you're needed within that niche. And like I said, clearly in the Washington cities and the National League of Cities, always having access to resources that can bring something to the table is a valuable addition. And I'll certainly help you any way I can to get you into those kind of, you know, pathways.
Yeah. And I was just going to mention, one of the videos that I did recently was a panel of 16 and 17-year-old Asian teenagers from Pennsylvania. And they have what's called a brave space. So this is a listening session for other students and teachers to listen to their lived experiences. And so I had them on my show, and 2 panels, and it was heartbreaking. Just, it's like, oh, long time ago when it was really racist. No, they're 16 and 17, and their school 30% Asian, yet they still experience all of this. And it's heartbreaking, but also inspiring, because now they're speaking out. And like some of them, this is with me and this other thing, it was just like the first time that they're owning their power. So they do want to help others speak up, and younger Asians, and to have conversations like, you are important, like, own your culture. Don't be afraid to use chopsticks. It's a bonus that you speak 2 languages. And so these teens are so inspiring. And I mean, I don't know anybody under 30. Like, most of the people I know are your age, Jim.
Yeah, as bad as that is, yeah.
And so it was just so inspiring to hear them, like, they had this newfound power as of the last month or 2. And so, I'm going to see what I can do and help guide them and support them.
Well, great.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we will talk very soon.
Okay. And I'm going to have you on my podcast now. So we'll get to spread the word around to the city folks.
That is right.
When was the last time you felt like this? Has it been a minute? It is time to mix it up. Climb out on those limbs and jump into life. Life is full of excitement. We just need to get curious, get uncomfortable, and go for it.